Pottery is the product of three ingredients. At the beginning is clay, and at the end is fire. Between these elements stands man. Shoji Hamada is one of the world's foremost potters. He lives and works in Mashiko, Japan, a village with a plentiful supply of clay and wood. In 1955, he was named by the Japanese government an intangible national cultural treasure. Since man's earliest history, the potter has played a vital role in the considered an art. With the development of modern technology, however, the role of the potter has declined, and the understanding of pottery as art exists less and less. At the south end of England sits the coastal town of St. Ives, where, more than 50 years ago, pottery was built by a man who had studied the art of the East. Bernard Leach, along with Hamada, realizes that deep beauty in pottery can come only when they treat the clay and the fire as their equals, and it is from that partnership with natural materials that their art emerges.
A few days ago, one of my newest students had a board full of his pots, and he wanted me to criticize. And I said, I'm going to show you the one I like best. And I picked that one out, and I said, this one. Put it back. And I thought, well, that's rather selfish of me. I'll try, I'll risk what the other people who've worked longer in this pottery, one of them 20 or more years, what they will pick out as the best pot. Perhaps say why. They all picked that same pot out. It was his free work, not work that I told him to do. But they all picked out. They had, and he's only been a few months here, they had assessed a kind of criterion of beauty. Whether they were Japanese or English, there's still a common language of what is true and not true, apparent, rather buried under the surfaces of what you're supposed to like, and taught very often at school to like, and shouldn't be taught so didactically. Should be left to discover. There are some things that are never hit in the bullseye by shooting at the bullseye. They come incidentally. If you try to be good, you look like somebody who is trying to be good, and nobody believes very much in it, and so on. And the good part is likewise. Clays can be found in most countries, most places. It's not a prime difficulty. Prime difficulty is that the businessman who has a big factory making dinner plates or something wants something which we call and they call a paste, not clay anymore. Refined and refined so that by industrial process it can be reproduced without blemish, time after time after time, and fulfill our practical needs of the table and the kitchen, washing up and so on. But human nature is not like that. Human nature is also in love with irregularity. You can see by the touch, know by the touch, that the man has enjoyed using the clay because it was natural. And when it comes to toothpaste, it's true, it does talk to your heart. And if your heart doesn't get joy in making, how do you expect people who use the things that you make to have their hearts touched? I ask that as a question.
It takes just a few minutes to go from a lump of clay to the finished shape of a pot. But during this period, great concentration extends from the mind through the fingers, and each movement contributes to the final form. The marks left by the fingers on the wet spinning clay, the softness or hardness of the curves created by the upward pull, and the proportion of the pot's mass to its base determine the vitality and freedom of the final form. It is during these brief moments of creation that the intuitive contribution of the potter determines the character of the pot, and that an unself-conscious relationship between clay and individual can be born.
How do we know what is a good pot? Well, we started by saying it was an extension of a human nature, or of a group of people who had established a long tradition of the right way of doing a thing to serve life for use and pleasure combined. I'll take one of these that are in front of me, which are various. Some old, 12th century Chinese Sung, about 2 centuries old Japanese folk, about 2 or 3 centuries, I should say, Korean folk, English folk, 14th century. One of my pieces. Now take that. Do you think perhaps it's not all that utilitarian? You'll find you'll be surprised. If you pour from that edge there, at a pouring angle, ensures that there's a recess. So the water or the liquid or the milk or the cider or the small beer will drip from that edge, not run down there. Well, that's one of the objects in making a picture, that it won't make a mess on the table. And it'll pour in a pleasant flow, natural movement of liquid. But there's another reason for that flat edge there. That flat edge was the basis for the next one in the kiln, which was put on it like that. And so and so. Here's Japan, folk art. Look at that. A pattern. Modest brown, modest grey-blue, made with local impure cobalt. A pattern painted by a child under 10. No artist can paint that. No living artist could paint that. It is as though no living actor can behave just as a natural child behaves. Well, Korea, England, Korea, Japan, folk art. Here, China, 12th century. Sung dynasty. Made, I am practically certain, for the use of a temple. Beautifully thrown, fired at a high temperature. All of these are all about 1300 or upwards degrees centigrade, white heat. But this is very peculiar. It has an elegance which is not of proper countryside. It's elegance not of the court either. It's elegance reserved for the religious world. And as I hinted earlier, Buddhism is quietist. It's ingoing. It's searching here to the core of the universe, within oneself. It's truth. If you haven't got truth inside you, how can you put it outside? You may not be a very good man. I don't mean necessarily that. That peasants were necessarily holy men, although some of them were. But that the doing of the right thing in the right way, if I put it into very straight language to people who don't, many of them now, believe in God, it's worship. Let's say worship of life itself. And that good work can't be done without that. In the denial of life. It's the absence of vitality in pulse, in drawing, in music, in the way the bow is crosses the string.
give you the chance. Rather getting difficult.
The finishing of the foot is important. Aside from stability, the potter must be sure that the proportions and mood of the pot are carried through this final detail. Glazes to the traditional potter were more functional than decorative and were very simply made. In keeping with this tradition, Hamada uses rocks gathered from nearby riverbeds and hillsides. These rocks contain small quantities of impure metals such as iron, manganese, and cobalt. After being ground, the powdered rock is mixed with wood ash and water. The types of rock and ash used and their proportion determine the color, opacity, and texture the fire will give the finished pot.
こうならんだろう。
これカチッと
これ塗っちゃったら今そこへデザイン行きます。
Hamada frequently employs a technique of painting wax on part of a pot. This prevents the glaze from adhering. During the firing, the wax burns away, leaving the design and clay visible underneath.
Before leaving these, it occurs to me to say one thing. There is no personality, ego, of a human being to be seen anywhere there. It's two kinds of human being. The real man and the sham man that's on the surface most of the time, who thinks what he's been taught to think and is not really thinking nakedly. His real self responding to nature, or man's nature's work. But there is no egotism. You can't pick the character of any person, except you say that they are natural as the things out of this window on the beach, the pebbles, the birds, seagulls, fish, are all natural and beautiful. So that is the standard that the East has to give to the West, which the West has forgotten for a long time while it's been running after machinery and science and ruling the heart and the feeling and the imagination of man by his intellect. For almost as long as he has been making pottery, one design in particular has predominated among Hamada's decorations, a stem leaf motif which he repeats on pot after pot.
I got the idea of sugar cane in Okinawa Island. When I started there to study there 50 years ago, all from the my workshop, all sugar canes. And after typhoon, some are broken the stem, and the leaves, of course, also. I didn't think about so much, but after 1 or 2 years later, just happened to start. But now, altogether, maybe more than 10,000 times or even more. I have been repeating. And the Anna said that is a real thing. That's why I never get tired to repeat. Some people say the artist mustn't do that, so make so many things, the same things. It isn't the same, all different. If it comes once with my arm, not in the brush, the arm, or the body, in the heart, they come.
Hamada's kiln has 5 chambers. It will take 3 days to load the more than 2,000 pieces made by Hamada and his co-workers.
Ah, 大作来たね。前の車あるしね。はい。それじゃあ、まあ六角は真っ赤入るだけのとこ入れると。下の店は何だよ、こっちはね。だからだいぶ先3分だ。水5、6が。さあ、下からできる。来た。なかなかいい配偶水だな。 Came to Japan, that's 99, as an painter, rather etcher. He studied etching under Blanking, English etcher, very good one. So he brought the machine, everything. He carried by himself the etching thing. But it was too early to Japanese. He couldn't get any good pupils. But instead of that, he learned just happened to paint some pattern on lacquerware. So the first pots we saw down by the beach, lacquer firing. But I was very impressed there. Whenever Leach had a show in Tokyo, I used to come back to look at. I have great respect for his work. At that time, already he was invited to come back to England. But he is a good painter and etcher, but he didn't know much of the technical point of the pottery. So he was rather hesitated to come back to England as a potter. And he asked me to go there together. That's why. But I wanted to more things to learn from each. That's one thing. And also I wanted to look at the east from the west.
And we had 3 years together here, during which he helped me. I'd hardly fired a kiln by myself then. I knew I was taking a great risk. There were no trained people here for handwork. I didn't know if there was wood. I didn't know if there was clay and wood I wanted to burn in kilns. So the first 2 or 3 weeks we went out walking over the countryside asking for candle clay. Candle clay was the only plastic clay that was used in Cornwall at that time. On a miner's hat to stick a candle in. So candle clay. So we went about and looking about. And one afternoon, looking over the countryside, I saw a patch of cut ground which was red, and I thought, that's funny. This is china clay and granite country. What's red? Chimney pot doing up there. Went down to it, past the station. At the station, I saw some sand on the road, picked it up, and looked. It was like beach sand, only plastic. I thought, uh-oh. So we must go to this place. We followed it up, found the quarry, found the quarryman, went on over it, found it was a patch of very early deposit, river deposit, not the same formation as the geology around. and found that there was a place where he had dug clay, plastic smooth clay, which was used at Newlyn in making the keys. For behind the granite blocks they wanted clay that would not let the water seep through. So I found clay in that way with Hamada. We had a small showroom, not this one, at the gate there, and the public began to come in. And when it was a little bit more honest than usual, it would say, well, you know, Mr. Leach, I must say, I think your colors are pretty dull, browns and blacks and greys. Haven't you got anything blue? I said, you mean the sort of blue that you think of with Wedgwood, I suppose, pretty nearly royal blue. He said, yes, that's right. I said, I'm sorry, I don't like that kind of blue. I like quiet colors. They do where I learned my pottery in the East.
To bring the kiln to full heat requires a constant stoking with wood for 40 hours.
What happens inside of the kiln? If you want to know what happens inside of the kiln, you better get inside. Many things happen. You have smoky fire, you have clear burning fire, they'll give you different colors. There's a lot of what people think is luck. Personally, I and many of my friends feel if the potter gets luck in a kiln, he has heaven on his side.
The white heat necessary to melt the glazes has been reached. It takes almost 3 days for the kiln to cool.
もうちょっと持ってますか同じこと。いい、これはもういいね。なかなか。ああ、そう。今度、この国のメーカー。ああ、それによってしてもいいね。それもいいね。はい。それで。実際どうだかな。いいよ。もうちょっとやれてもいいんだけどな。光が。アンコラ。そうかな。鳥が入るかな。いいかきれい。ああ。ちょっとないね。そうだね。ああ、いいや。なかなかいい。いいな。ね。うん。やっぱり回ってこい。そうだね。もいい。これもちょうどいいからね。そうか。本当だよ。本当はうまくやったね。トマトなんとかやね。なかなかいい。柿の肌はいいね。でも新しいしね。もうこれ一つこれが言ってるんだもん。これ一つね。Usually people want to measure the standard, some of the rules. That's quite a mistake. We don't need any, or even the knowledge. The pots I like, really, that is a good pot for me. Not more than that. If you start with have the clay and wheel, teach us.
まだやんの。
だって先に行くんじゃなかったな。だから、ね、ジャンを